All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Do Right Initiative, I warmly welcome you to this episode of our webinar. Um, the Do Right Initiative is actually a movement that mobilizes like-minded Nigerians who understand the fundamental damage that lawlessness and moral decadence have done to our nation and see the imperative in reversing it. And we try to join in the development of movement to initiate a rebirth, new mindsets where every Nigerian sincerely desires to do right every time and everywhere. And we are very committed. Our vision basically is to entrench and reawaken uprightness in Nigeria. And we're very committed to value reorientation built around integrity, diligence, respect, compassion, justice, meritocracy, and courage. Tonight's topic is actually a very engaging one. Is your role in advocacy in creating positive change? And my name is Lola, and I'm very happy to be your host tonight. I'm going to be joined by two very phenomenal resource persons. Much later. Okay, Chinenye, you're welcome. Chinenye is here now. So, but basically, before I start, if you just indulge me a little, you see, thinking about this earlier on today, and I realized that a little over a decade ago, I co-founded what was known as one of the biggest bread bakeries in Lagos. We sold 25,000 loaves a day, and our annual revenue was about R1 billion, and we employed about 500 staff over the course of the operations. But today, that business like cereals and tomatoes in Ikeja, Lagos. Every day over the last 2 years, we have seen the death of a number of commercial bakeries across the country, leading to massive loss of jobs and other socioeconomic issues. And one of the basic issues in this sector is that in the last 3 years alone, it's been about 1,020% increase in the price of direct raw materials. And the main culprit is wheat flour. Today, wheat flour sells about 23 to 25x of the initial price that was purchasing for when we started on the before. And the reason for that basically is the scarcity of efforts to facilitate wheat imports and of course the fallout of the Russia and Ukraine war. Now what we now have is a situation where a loaf of bread is selling for 1,500 naira in an economy where minimum wage is 30,000. That's insanity at its best definition. And a more fundamental issue for me basically is the fact that there is a resurgence in growth, which is a catalyst to increase yield so that some bakeries can remain in business. That, for me, again, is suggestive of an imminent public health crisis. Now, the question on my mind is how and why are we even here? Because I remember that at the dawn of the Obasanjo administration, there was a policy thrust on cassava flour. Now, the question is, what happened to that policy? Why didn't we follow through? What could you have done to address the gaps and the teething issues? That could advocacy have played a role in reversing what is now major hunger in the land? As I speak to you today, I'm speaking to you from Kwara State, home to Offa, where situation is growing in large commercial quantity. And over the last few days, we have been looking for we have been looking for policy incentives to support our venture in creating or in manufacturing sweet potato flour. And up till now, we cannot find. The closest we know to this is that there is a document with the Food and Agriculture Organization under the United Nations, but nobody knows where that is. Even the international development strategists that we reached out to couldn't help us. Now, this is it. Everywhere and in every sector, we see how this nation is failing as a result of gaps in policy formulation and implementation. And the consequences on our national lives are far more damaging than we can imagine. The question is, are we going to continue to sit down and do nothing, which automatically indicts us, or are we going to stand up and start to do something about advocating for policies in different sectors that can better our national lives? I bet the latter is a more desirable option for us as nation builders and change makers. How do we move from here? Tonight, we are joined with two outstanding resource persons. One is Lola Adekanye. Lola Adekanye has dual responsibilities at the Center for International Private Enterprise, where she serves as a country director and also has a cross-thematic portfolio as the program coordinator or program director for accountability, governance, and integrity an experienced international development and policy professional with a demonstrated history of conceptualizing and executing innovative initiatives in response to complex, evolving governance challenges. Lola, you're very welcome, and we're very glad to have you tonight.
Thank you, Toba.
Okay,
Very
then,
happy
and
to
of
be here.
course, yeah, we really hope to learn from you. And of course, we have Chinenye, Uwanaka. Chinenye, I hope I didn't murder your name. I hope I didn't murder your surname. Uwanaka, am
No,
I
you're
correct?
good.
Okay,
Uwanaka, yes.
Uwanaka, okay. So Chinenye is a Harvard-trained policy implementation expert and convener of Africa Policy Conversations Initiative, AFPC, which is a Pan-African group of intellectuals with a goal to revolutionize policies which will not only serve Nigerian citizens, but also Africans within the continent and in diaspora. The organization actually works with international organizations like the World Bank and the NSIA. Chinenye is a nation builder, and her true passion is to empower people and fight against extreme poverty and injustice. She works as the managing partner of Firma Advisory, a law and consulting firm in Nigeria with clients across Africa, Middle Belt, Europe, sorry, Africa, Middle East, Europe, and America. Chinenye, you are very, very welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the
All right.
introduction.
Okay, so once again, welcome everybody. If you're joining us for the first, if you're joining us again, this is an initiative of the Do Right. This program is an initiative of Do Right movement. Do Right is a movement of like-minded Nigerians who actually see the damage that moral decadence and lawlessness has done to our country and feel the need to help in reversing it. We are non-partisan and we're a very secular organization. So let's dive right in. Um, so I think this question is to Lola first, and then to Chinenye. In as summarily as you can put it, what is policy advocacy, and how vital is it to the birth of a new Nigeria? Did you get that?
Yeah, absolutely, Toba. I'm very excited about this conversation um, for many reasons, and I think they'll start to come through as we start to talk about policy advocacy and all of the other questions that we sort of have outlined for this conversation. So, what is policy advocacy? I think first things first, what is policy? What are policies, right? And just broadly speaking, policies are, sort of a course of like principles or directions or guidance that is adopted by a government when it comes to like countries and nations and even regional entities or geographical locations that governments have come together to say this is our shared policy around specific things. um, and policies can be informed by a shared vision. It can be informed by values that are shared by citizens of a certain country. And, policies can touch on different themes. So, for example, we could have an education policy, and our education policy would be for, to produce more STEM graduates, people who can drive innovation in the tech space, in the engineering space. That could be a policy. So policies are really a set of guidelines and principles with goals that the government sets, or if it's a company, then the company sets for itself. In this context, we're talking about Nigeria, so it would be the government or leadership institutions setting policies. And there are different examples we'll talk about now. Then what is advocacy? um, Advocacy is what influences how policies get made. So advocacy can be led by leaders in the government institutions, the various government institutions. Um, Civil society organizations can be involved in advocacy. Civil society organizations is a really broad group of institutions or organizations. Individuals can be involved in advocacy, usually through collective organizing and community organizing. So policy advocacy is really the act, or all of the tasks involved in articulating the position or guidance that a group of people, institutions, citizens would want to propose, or would want the government to adopt. as an expert, by the way, I all of my conversations here would not be the position of my organization, but I'll be speaking from a lot of experience working on policy advocacy, particularly with private sector organizations. Every private sector organization or every civil society organization that's involved in some form of nation building or democracy strengthening always has a policy position on the relevant issues that affects them. So a good example would be, a chamber of commerce that represents business communities in Nigeria. Let's say some of your companies are, folks listening, some of your companies are members of a chamber of commerce. There will be a policy position on maybe taxation, on tariffs, recently there was the talk about cyber something tax, I think it was. And there will be a policy position on that, and your organizations would advocate for or against those policies. That's how policy advocacy works. So that's what policy advocacy is about. So in a nutshell, policy advocacy is where, you are involved in the process of the government determining what the guidance should be for how certain government agencies and institutions should operate to achieve very, very specific goals. And another policy area could be health, the healthcare sector. Maternal mortality rate is very high in Nigeria. So a policy position of the government could be to bring that down, and advocacy could be driven by the healthcare institutions in the country to say, this is how we should do it, and this is what we should be doing, or benchmarking ourselves against that. So that's a very simple way of explaining what policy advocacy is.
Thank you very much, Lola. Chinenye, and Jay, I'd like if you can just further expatiate on the other side of the question, which is how vital is this in the birth of a new Nigeria?
Okay, I actually prepared slides because I felt like this was a webinar. But then today I got questions, and then I'm now torn if I can go through my slides in like 5 minutes or if I should just answer off the top. Which you prefer?
I'll give you 3
I'm
minutes.
still gonna speak, but I just wanted to sort of lay a foundation.
Okay, I'll give you 3 minutes.
Say that again?
I'll give you 3 minutes.
Okay, I think it says I can present here. Okay. Let me just do that 1 second. Okay. This is a new app for me, so I'm just trying to, it's uploading the presentation. But thank you for that sort of foundation around what policy is. People think policy is very complicated, but it isn't. It's just basically the decisions, the plans, programs of government. So policy is not just only government, by the way. Civil society, citizens, everybody plays a role in policy making. So, for instance, when you had the NSAS movement, I like to use that example because it was a time when Nigerians came together despite tribe religion and said, we don't want police brutality. We want XYZ. And there was a list of things that the citizens wanted. That's an example of citizens playing a role in policy making. So all of us must be concerned with policy and advocacy. I want to see if, can you guys see anything like on the screen slide? Because I can't.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, this is just the first page about me. We don't need to go into it. And here it just talks about, policies. But I think for me, there was a definition of policy that I saw that said something like policy is like a wild horse. A wild horse in the fact that, or in the sense that you start out with one intention and sometimes you have like unintended consequences. Look at the full subsidy removal now. In quotes, World Bank, IMF, everyone was like, you have to remove subsidies, you have to float your currency. But now it's leading to like untold hardship, it's leading to so many situations. So policy making is not just something you just sit down in your office, you say this is going to happen, you enact it, or and then it just goes that way. So it's like a wild horse. It can go in different directions and it can have huge unintended consequences. So that's just what I wanted to point out with that. Now, why do policies fail? Right? Even the biggest organizations in this world who have tried to support development of policy and implementation of policy in Africa have spent billions of dollars over the past decades. And you still see those countries like Nigeria stuck in that poverty trap, having a lot of binding constraints, and the needle isn't moving, right? Despite donor aid, support with policy making, best practices, global best practices, and all that. So one of the major problems why policies fail is something called isomorphic mimicry. And isomorphic mimicry is just a simple word that, or it's complex, but it basically means copy and paste in simple terms. So our governments in Africa, unfortunately, have most times outsourced thinking, right? So everybody just wants to copy what the West is doing. If you look at our laws and our policies in Nigeria, a lot of it is borrowed from the UK. Something great's happening in China, we copy it. We just copy and paste without thinking about our context. Other things like working in silos. It will shock you that in this current government, a lot of ministries and ministers in the same government are not even working together. You know what I mean? There's a lot of lack of coordination, duplicity. One agency is doing one thing, another agency is doing one thing. And there's something called premature load bearing, where you have a policy that says, oh, you want to do something like eradicate education by in 2 years' time, eradicate education, eradicate out of school children, for instance, in 2 years. So this is something that can cause the other examples, and I'll move to the next slide.
Sorry to interject. You have just a minute more. I don't know how you want to round up on that.
Okay, that's fine. You can just I basically answered the question, right? What the question was about policy, right? So I basically answered it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That is much appreciated. The next question, right, is to you, Chinenye. Maybe we'll take off from where you used to, because all of the things I picked from your presentation is working in silos, right? So the question I ask is, currently in Nigeria, right, just picking back off on that, right? Currently in Nigeria, how effective is advocacy in the policy architecture?
How effective is advocacy in the policy architecture? So it depends on who. Sorry?
In your own assessment.
So do you mean advocacy by citizens individually, or do you mean like how effective? Do you mean how effective is it for us as citizens to advocate?
With the work that you do, how do you think advocacy has been effective in helping in enacting the right policies?
Okay, I got it now. So to be very honest with you, it's not easy, right? I'm not gonna say that, because we work in a very complex environment. And in the beginning, when you're trying to advocate, sometimes people think you have a selfish interest or a vested interest, right? But I would say that with persistency and trying to develop a critical mass, I strongly believe that change is hard. Nobody can do it alone. So organizations like ourselves, Africa Policy Conversations, we try to work with other like-minded people. We have people, Nigerians in the diaspora as well, in other states. So when we have that critical mass, at least the voices are more. Now, if the voices are more, then advocacy can be very effective. But if you're just trying to do it alone or in silos, then you might not really gain a lot of traction, to be very honest. But in the past, we've had people who have changed their policies, who have tried to be a little bit more user-centric and more evidence-based in their approach. So that's my response to that. Thank you.
Okay, beautiful. Lola, do you want to jump in on that? Do you have anything to say to that?
Absolutely. I think, and Chinenye made some really important points. I'll sort of emphasize some of them. But Toba, I think what would be helpful is to um, add a very important part to that question, which is how effective is advocacy, localized or homegrown advocacy, or how useful is that in policy architecture? I think that's quite an important thing to emphasize. And why is that? It's because, to be honest, one of the things that I see a lot in this space, working in over 16 countries across Africa, and Chinenye touched on some of the challenges with why policy formulation or implementation doesn't work, is this. You find that the people who are the most impacted by the problems that you're formulating policy to fix, they are the least vocal about how those policies should change. What do I mean? I give you an example. Take the case of maternal mortality. The people who are in fact impacted the most are in fact women who are having kids, mostly public healthcare facilities. Their voices are the least heard or articulated or brought up to the top in policy advocacy around maternal mortality health. Or maybe even talk about GBV, gender-based violence affecting women. Maybe talk about people living in slums, for example, and the standard of living in those places. They are the least vocal. Talk about trade policy, the Africa Free Trade, AFCTA, Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that's just been signed. 90%, the Presidential Business Enabling Committee's recent report confirms that 90% of businesses in Nigeria fall into the small and mid-sized category. And so what that means is if there's a boost in trade opportunity in Africa because of the AFCFTA, it's really this demographic of private sector partners, the folks who sell share butter, the folks who, are small scale industries. They are the ones who should benefit from trade. But in formulating policies that would advance the implementation of the trade in goods or the trade in services protocols under the AFCFTA, they are the least considered. Their voices are the least heard. It's the larger businesses or the institutions that have the funding to build coalitions and be part of the policy dialogues that are able to articulate their position on policy making. So in terms of the policy architecture in Nigeria, it's critical for the beneficiaries, the folks who are impacted by policy making, it's critical for their own perspectives to be considered in the policy making architecture, because that's one of the reasons why we find that we make policies, but they fall flat on their face. Why? Because a lot of times our assumptions are off. They are challenged quite a bit. So, I sort of have I hardly think of challenges, but you have to think of challenges, think of solutions. And I sort of have like a 3, point mandate to say, okay, when we go through all our checklists of whether you're making or formulating your policy position right, these are the other 3 that you have to consider. As a donor organization, one of them also is, are these positions we're putting forward, are they sustainable? Are they implementable? You set a policy where you require solid technical capabilities, but you don't have universities or institutions churning out people who can manage Blue Rail, for instance, who can take over the management of Blue Rail. What are we missing there? So, I can talk a little bit about that. So to your question, it's critical, but what is more critical is not just general advocacy, but it's advocacy that considers the beneficiaries, the people who will be impacted the most by those
Okay.
policies. That is critical for a new Nigeria.
Okay, thank you so much, Lola. That's a very important point. So, we're going to take a video break now, but we're going to start off. When we start is, how do you think we can change that? And I'm going to put that to you and Chinenye. What do we need to do to create a more inclusive framework that would bring in the most impacted audience into the whole policy architecture? But we'll take a video break for 30 seconds and then we'll be back. Thank you. Can we have the video break, please? All right, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, and welcome back. I can't see Chinenye. Are you still there?
Yes, I am. Can you see me?
Okay, all right then. So the question before we went on the break is, Lola addressed the point about how that the most impacted audience is really, they're never really in the room where policies are being formulated about them. How can that change, or what do we need to do?
Okay, that's a great question. So I'll premise your question by saying that in Nigeria we've had growth, but we've had jobless growth, right? So a lot of our policies and just in general, the growth of the country hasn't been inclusive, meaning that right now we have about 130 million people who are multidimensionally poor. And those are the people that you are referring to. How do we ensure that the man in the village in Shogbo or somewhere in Owerri or Ekiti is carried along? And for me, I'd like to answer my questions in a very practical sense, where we are as a nation. Um, a lot of people are so disillusioned. And what the government has to do to ensure that these policies are inclusive is to meet the people where they are, right? Ensure that whatever policy is designed for people is user-centric and evidence-based. The reason why I keep hammering on this is because if you keep copying what other people are doing and you're not really looking at what is actually happening on ground, you keep missing it. Now, there is a role for the people who are on this call to play in this process. When we talk about things like elite consensus, most countries that have been able to move out of abject poverty have gotten to a stage where the elite, be it the elite in government, the elite in business, the elite in the civil service, in the military, have decided that, you know what, enough is enough. Like in the Asian countries, in Singapore, for instance, the president, after they were expelled, at some point he actually cried and he was on radio and he told his citizens, look, enough is enough. We're no longer going to be a laughing stock. You know what I mean? And we need to get to that point as a nation where we say enough is enough. So you need leaders that lead with empathy. And you need citizens that hold the leaders accountable to the promises. A second point that I'll make is that, prior to this time in Nigeria, we've had a lot of policies made around rent seekers. So you have a lot of big men, billionaires, sometimes who have policies tilted in their favor, right? And those policies are not inclusive, like I say. So we're not thinking of the greater good. A lot of people in government are thinking about their personal interests. You see a policymaker, both at the federal level and the state level, going into government to make policies just to line his pocket. He wants to do contracts. He wants to get kickbacks. These are the things that unfortunately have influenced our policy making in Nigeria. It favors a few. And that's why we're where we are. We keep thinking it's rocket science. No. So what we need to do, and I like that we're focusing on solutions, is ensure that we have a good manufacturing industrial policy. No nation can grow through aid. You need to create wealth to lift people out of poverty. But guess what? The wealth creation has to be inclusive. So there's so many sectors that we have to look at, and the policies is not one size fits all. The government has to go to the ground. Every state in Nigeria is different. The mineral resources, the human resources, everything is different at different levels, at different tiers of government. So it needs to be co-creation between the private sector, public sector, civil society. All hands must be on deck. There needs to be that consensus to move Nigeria forward, not for the interest of a few, but for the interest of all. I'll pause here because I don't want to speak too long. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chinenye. So I'm going to get back to you from where Chinenye stopped. I'm just going to say that. So, how can individuals or movement like Do Right Initiative, how can we support you or at least play a part to complement your work in policy advocacy? I mean, driving from Chinenye's last position.
That's a fantastic question. We don't get that question all the time. So I'm very glad to hear it. I think I'll hammer on three things. And the first one would be, I think what we're missing as a country that we need to have, and I'll refer folks to a book by Francis Fukuyama, Political Order, Political Decay. There's a whole chapter on Nigeria, and it talks about where we missed the nation building train. And it's interesting. Every Nigerian can resonate with that part of the book where it talks about, how we think of Nigeria as this national cake and everybody wants to get a piece of it. And there's no sense of ownership and belonging and responsibility to make this country a great country for the benefit of every citizen, right? I think what we don't have, which would be helpful, is a strong sense of like a collective vision. Kingsley Moghalu wrote a book talking about worldview, Nigeria's worldview. I think that's important. I think it's important for every Nigerian, whether you're in a remote village in the northeast or a remote village in the southeast, to feel like if they ask, what has my country done for me, they can point to something, and they ought to feel the sense of want to do something for my country. A shared collective vision, even if it's not in the sense of what my country has done for me or what I want to do for my country, but something that says, this is why I'm proud to be Nigerian, and this is why I will defend our Nigerian values, in any gathering. Um, it's it's a very difficult proposition to sell right now, given how disoriented, defiably so, the young people of Nigeria are today. But I tell you, there's no way that you talk down at something or you don't believe in it. In Michelle Obama's recent book, there's a phrase that I always remember. And I want every Nigerian to think about and remember. It says poverty or failure is a mindset long before it's reality. It's reality, and this is true. This is really true from a psychological perspective. So how can Do Right Initiative and all the tentacles that Do Right Initiative has to other organizations and leaders, how can you support the work we do? I think one of the ways I'll ask is for you to help through communication, through articulating a shared vision for Nigeria's nation building, come up with a vision that every Nigerian will own and want to stand by, a vision, a mantra, a philosophy that will help overcome the things that divide us, the things that bad leaders take advantage of to divide us, like our diversity, which can be beautiful, diversity in terms of religion or in terms of tribe. I think that's important. I think that's one place to start, and that would help rekindle some kind of pride in working in Nigeria and for to build Nigeria. That's one. The second thing is around personal responsibility. There's a collective illusion in Nigeria where everybody thinks, oh, nobody cares about the country, so why should I care? Very recently, we were coming back from just last week a workshop, and a colleague was lamenting about how a Nigerian was not behaving properly somewhere, and another Nigerian corrected that Nigerian, and the Nigerian said, well, is this airport your father's building or whatever? It's the personal responsibility to do right, to hold ourselves to very high standards regardless of who is watching. And I think that is most important for leaders, for the elite, as Chinenye was talking about. So I won't spend too much time on that, but that's critical. At the end of the day, we've seen in nations that have fallen, we've seen that the guardrails that held fast happened to fall on the personal integrity of one individual. And there are lots of nations we can talk about to give examples there. And the final and most important thing, and this is where my thematic expertise is in, it's around corruption and integrity. I think even just calling it corruption now just pulls a wool over what it really is. Corruption has become so entrenched that it's now an entitlement, right? And so just peeling back the layers of what corruption is important in Nigeria. But one of the ways that I would connect the first point about the shared vision with this is, if we have a shared vision about what we want Nigeria to be, what we want Nigeria to deliver to us, to our children, and to the future unborn generation of Nigerians, how we want Nigerians to be treated when we go to airports. If we have that shared vision, what corruption then is would be a disconnect between our personal desires and that shared vision that we hold very dear, you know. And so I think the third way to help us would be really around just peeling the onion, the layers around really what is integrity in every sphere. It's sad that every time we do a survey and study, we find that the people who are the most vocal and concerned and upset and hurt by corruption are also involved in a certain flavor of corruption, which shows how much we've forgotten, you know, where the line is. And so it's really helpful to build an ecosystem that grows of folks who are starting to challenge the assumptions about what is right and what is wrong, and make that something that's institutional across institutions. And I've been working on that for many years. Got to have a lot more I can talk about there, and support on how to dismantle corrupt networks.
Thank you so much, Lola. That's been very helpful. So, Chinenye, so we're going to take another video break. But before we take that video break, Chinenye, I'm going to, if you want to contribute to what Lola just said, that's really fine. But then again, I'd like to ask you when we come back, right? I want us to talk a little bit about lobbying, right? Does this have a place in advocacy? I mean, lobbying, right? Does this have a place in policy advocacy? And can we, as Do Right Initiative, galvanize as a lobby group to influence policy formulation and or implementation? Did you get that? So the question
Yes,
is, okay, beautiful. So we're going to take a video break for 30 seconds, and when we come back, we'll defer to you, Chinenye. Once again, thank you everyone for your attention. We'll take a video break. I'll be back. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everybody. Once again, this is the multi-webinar session of the Do Right Initiative. The Do Right Initiative is a movement of like-minded Nigerians who actually see the damage that the damage that moral decadence and lawlessness have done to our country, and we feel a need to reverse this by creating new mindset and just birthing a change, a new mindset, and we hope to be able to engage value orientation built around integrity, diligence, respect, compassion, meritocracy, justice, and courage. Our vision is actually to entrench uprightness, in Nigeria. And yes, we are non-partisan, we are non-religious, and we're not geographic, and you're very free to join us. So Chinenye, back to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, I want to touch on a little bit about what she said, and then I would continue with the question around lobbying. Now, and this just closely ties to what's Do Right Initiative, and I love the name of the organization or the movement, Do Right, because it's also an attitude problem, is a mindset problem. And when she talks about corruption, you know, I often say, because of poverty and poverty of the mind, a lot of Nigerians, you know, have this scarcity mentality, which leads to corruption. So everybody, and then also there's so many things that are really So like the civil servants, the director will tell you that their take home is 200,000 naira or 300,000 naira, and they oversee a budget of how many billion. So the point I'm trying to make is that corruption is seen as a way of life, and there are so many factors that have led to it. So the Do Right Initiative has a strong role to play in so many ways, right? Um, the mindset shift that needs to be done for the citizens, both those, because leaders are a product of our citizens, right? And if we see our leaders coming out, what's it called, showing off stolen wealth, and we're making them chairman of a committee in church, or we're making them, I don't know, an icon, giving them Man of the Year award or whatever. We need to bring back that culture. We need to awaken the conscience of the nation. So Do Right Initiative definitely is doing well with that, but we need to do much more. You know what I mean? That's one point. And then the second point is, when we talk about policies, you know that I've seen fantastic people get into governments, but they failed woefully. Because no matter how beautiful a policy document is, the crux of the matter is the implementation. And that's why I started the slide presentation on why policies fail. So Nigeria has a big problem of implementation. We talk about very grand ideas, but we're not implementing. So an area that Do Right Initiative and other organizations can continue to play a role is in accountability, holding government accountable to implementation of the policies and the campaign promises. How do you measure implementation? You need to be able to monitor and evaluate what has worked in the past, what hasn't worked. The one that is working, you continue. The one that is not working, you stop, you pivot. There's something called PDIA, problem-driven iterative adaptation. But basically, it's a tool that you use to measure, right? And you iterate, you learn, you adapt. That's something we don't do in Nigeria. We wait after 4 years, 8 years to say, oh, this thing has failed. And then by that time, the country has already gone, further down the. So that's the point. And then the final point on that is weak institutions. Our institutions, whether it's the court system, whether it's the civil service, whether it's the legislative arm of government, institutions that are supposed to help to safeguard these policies, this implementation, rule of law, we have very weak institutions in Nigeria. If something happens to you, sorry, you're on your own. You can't even call 911. You can't call anybody. Our institutions are so weak. And what Do Right Initiative, I believe, should do, to be honest, is get a lot of people involved. I know we're non-partisan. I'm also non-partisan. But people need to get involved in governance. Because you keep advocating, and then there's nobody there to implement what you're advocating. But imagine if everybody in Do Right, I don't know how many members are in Do Right, but you're able to get one person to get involved in politics. We're able to get like how many governors, how many senators, how many House of Rep members, how many. Nigeria is going to change. Because then you have leaders that are, authorizers with an itch, people who actually care. But right now we have a mismatch because good people have stayed away. Good people have left a vacuum, as whether we like it or not. We've stayed in private sector, we're making money, we're doing things, people are jackpying, and we're leaving it to criminals, rogues. So that's one of the main things that I think that Do Right Initiative should do, and we should continue to do as concerned, active citizens. And then the final point is on lobbying, the question you asked me. Lobbying it depends on the country that you're in. Some countries frown at it. In Nigeria, lobbying has been abused because it has become rent-seeking. Lobbying in Nigeria sometimes has led to briefcase businesses. People are just lobbying for their own selfish interests. However, if Do Right Initiative wants to lobby for the greater good and is done in a transparent manner, by all means, because a lot of people's interests are already being taken into account. So at least lobby for the interest of the nation, right? So that's my answer to that question. I don't know if you have any follow-ups. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Lola, do you want to say something in 30 seconds? If you
30
just-
seconds, very quickly, 30 seconds. Policy advocacy is a very broad space. So if Do Right Initiative is going to be weighing in into policy advocacy, you need to like hone in on what aspects, what exactly. It could take 7 years to get a policy through. What would that entail? Would it mean legal and legislative changes? Would it mean capacity building? My recommendation would be two things before delving into policy advocacy. Sort of have a strategy, zero in on where can you have catalytic impact. That would be my first suggestion. Secondly, do you want to focus on legal and legislative changes or implementation? As Chinenye said, I even have a slide that if I knew you could share slides, I'd have shown you. Is just, it shows you the extent and amount of policies and laws that we have that are solid in many parts of Africa, but when it comes to implementation, we are zero. And so sometimes you may not want to jump right into policy advocacy. You might want to jump into tracking the implementation of those policies, because maybe that's really where you might have impact. So just generally, before delving into policy advocacy, it's important to answer a few key questions. What area and what role would you play? And that way you would be able to track impact.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you. So we're going to go on another video break. But before, yeah, we're going to go on another video break, and then I'll come back to you guys. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much for your attention so far. The session has been very rewarding so far. So let's go on another video break, and we'll come back to you. Thank you. All right, thank you so very much. So like I was saying initially when we started, before then, please, this webinar is being streamed live on multiple channels, Facebook, Twitter, and other channels. And I just want to appeal to you, if you have any questions from the audience, please let us have it. I would like to take that for like 3 to 5 minutes. So we'd expect questions from the audience. Thank you so much. But before then, I was saying at the beginning of this session that for example, I'm in Ilorin, Kwara State, trying to look for a policy incentive document on manufacturing, and we cannot find it anywhere. We know that the FAO in the UN has it, but we cannot find it. So the question I want to ask is there some sort of compendium that warehouses all policies, in the country that you can, I don't know if you have information on that you think we can have access to, or at least maybe on a sectoral basis, do we have these resources readily accessible for us to be able to even know what exactly we want to measure? Because something that you have said, Chinenye, that I picked on is monitoring and evaluation of the policies that are already in place. But the truth is, you cannot monitor and evaluate what you do not know. Do you understand? So the question is to both of you: is there any resource or compendium or database of all policies, either as a group or on a sectoral basis, that we can have access to? If you can lead us in that direction, that'll be good.
Is this for me or I don't know?
Okay, I think wants to go first. Yeah.
Okay. So unfortunately, our government isn't very good at keeping records. And so most government agencies and ministries do not have like a comprehensive database. Some of them are better than others. Some of them have websites, for instance, where when there's a new policy, they put it on their websites. But to shock you that I've engaged with one of the most, important government entities in this country, and they had a policy that directors in that government agency had no idea what the policy was, but it was something they had just released recently. So this is taking back to the whole idea of weak institutions. We don't really have institutions that are able to keep themselves accountable and publish all these things. However, if you're talking about incentives, I know that NIPC, the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission or Council, basically has, there was a time that when Yewande Sediku was there, they launched this I have the documents in my office that has like a list of all the incentives in Nigeria. You can get pioneer status. I'm a lawyer. We've applied for pioneer status for a couple of companies. I would tell you the process is very bureaucratic, and even sometimes when you look at the whole hassle you have to go through, it can be very discouraging. And sometimes there are even sectors that have incentives, but people in customs will still keep people's goods. And meanwhile, it's supposed to be like renewable energy now. The parts or whatever is supposed to be custom free or duty free. But the people there is left for them to now implement it because they'll still ask you for money. So these are the challenges, if I'm being very honest. I'm not surprised that you're in a state and you cannot find. I'm not surprised. This is so, but I don't know if Lola wants to add anything to that point. There are some private sector people that are trying to do things. I know a couple of other organizations that have come across who are also creating a database as well, but I was just answering in reference to government. So go ahead, please.
All right,
Sure.
thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I would say is, to be honest, no country has a comprehensive policy database, because policies are so diverse and they change, especially for countries that are monitoring effectively. They change very, fluidly. We as SIPE have done something similar in Egypt in the past, but that was focusing on economic policies and in particular sectors, and really focusing on the policies that have been part of the agenda for the chambers of commerce that we've supported. In Nigeria, we support almost 100 private sector organizations. And for Kwara State, the Kwara Chamber of Commerce is one to focus on. We established the KwaKopa, Kwara State Coalition of Business and Professional Associations, many years ago. And Kwasima is a very active member of KwaKopa. I would say that if you're looking for a compendium of policies in a particular sector, fortunately, Chinenye and I are lawyers. I don't know if you're a lawyer, Toba, but we say that, a good lawyer, okay, for today, for this minute, we make you an honorary legal, colleague. A good lawyer may not know where to find all the law, but a good lawyer needs to know where to find the law. If you're looking for policies about specific stuff, so for instance, Chinenye gave an example of NIPC. If you're international investors, or you're going to have funding from an international investor, NIPC, PEBEC are good places to go to see what policies are relevant. But for Kwara State, Kwasima is a good place to go. I really recommend that for businesses, small businesses, mid-sized businesses. Please register with a chamber of commerce or a business association that is active and engaged in policy advocacy. You cannot do it alone. So don't try, but register with these associations and hold them accountable to doing things like this. So we hold our chambers and business association grantees and partners accountable to tracking policy changes, and they do a terrific job when they go through the side programs. So if Kwasima is not doing that, it's Kwasima that can do that for you. It's great to have the government publish its policies, but that doesn't do much for you because, as Chinenye said, there's often a disconnect from one agency to another, what the policy is. What helps is if your representative organization, like let's say, the Chamber of Commerce in Kwara State, which is Kwasima, if they have the policies, then they will track implementation and they can quickly call out the government to say, this policy you have is either not working or it has too many bottlenecks. So you're able to track the outcomes of those policies. So I'll say for you and for anybody really, almost every state in Nigeria has a chamber of commerce or has a business membership association. Follow up with them. If you're looking in the health sector, you want to look at the NMAs, the National Medical Association. So depending on the sector and industry, you want to look at the most influential, most involved, so to speak, lobbyist group. I don't like to use lobbying because now that word is a bit, I didn't get a chance to talk about that. But most involved advocacy partner with the government. Look to them to see what the policy is and how it's evolved.
All right, thank you so much, Lola. Okay, so we're going to take a final video break for 30 seconds. When we come back, I'm going to give you both 90 seconds each to just kind of take us on. I want to get a little bit more personal. Take us on your journey on how you got to this level to what you're doing, and then for us as individuals, right, that are passionate about this, what is the starting point? Do I need to be Harvard trained to on policy on policy. I mean, I'm just
In 90
please.
seconds.
Yes, in 9 seconds. When I come. All right. So thank you. So who's first? Chinenye and Lola. 90 seconds, please.
All right. I think the question is, how do we get to where we are now as an individual? So, like, I'm a lawyer. I studied law in the UK, decided to move back to Nigeria. I always knew that I would be part of the people who will be involved in nation building, right? So I've always been from a young age passionate about why are things the way they are, how can it get better. So every time I've struggled to sort of figure out how do I go about it. So being a lawyer, we started out in my firm. When my firm, I didn't even think I had an employee then. An access to justice initiative, right? Going to prisons, paying fines for inmates, looking at the whole justice system and how things were so dysfunctional, right? And people didn't get basic access to justice. Now, also being a woman in a marginalized society, my profession, the legal profession, especially at the top, can be very sexist and ageist. So interacting with that. And then secondly, I also had to interact with government agencies. Remember, my firm is headquartered in Abuja. So you're going to government offices, you're dealing with people trying to get kickbacks, you're dealing with people who are sexually, trying to sexually assault you. You're just dealing with so many issues. And sorry?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so
seconds.
basically I got involved. Yeah.
So where do I start from? Or where do we start from individual?
Okay. Where do we start from as individuals? So I personally set up an organization, like I said, Access to Justice Initiative, and then Africa Policy Conversations with like-minded people. Everybody doesn't have to go that route. But there's the power of one. You can do something in your own sphere of influence. So if it means run, like I said, I always try to push people to run for office because people have to implement this advocacy. If it means forming a critical mass, if it means just being a change, just being the change you want to see, basically, because your light will also illuminate other people and inspire other people to take action as well. So that's 30 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Lola?
Toba, how do you tell lawyers to speak for so short a time? But I'll try. It happens that I'm also a lawyer. I'm sure that you didn't plan that we will both be lawyers. But I started off as a lawyer, completed my education in England, finished at Warwick, and then jumped right into white-collar crime defense. I'm called to the bar in New York and in Nigeria, and I was doing white-collar crime defense in Washington, D.C. for a few years. Got completely disoriented with defending companies that were doing the wrong thing, engaging in corruption and abuse and all kinds of things, and moved on to the World Bank to try to fix the problem before companies got into trouble. And I always wanted to move back home and work from home and closer to the beneficiaries of our programs. So this is how I find myself doing a lot of anti-corruption, but also policy advocacy work across Africa. I think I did that in time.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes. Then coming to the question, where can people plug in? How do you engage? I think the first thing to engage would be a mindset. And I would say kick two things that plagues us in Nigeria. One is kick that reject collective illusion. Not everybody is doing it. Not everybody is paying bribes. Not everybody wants to jackpot because it's hard. I'm not saying you shouldn't jackpot, but if you jackpot, keep the door open to jackpot and add your whatever to nation building. Reject collective illusion, number one. also reject intellectual laziness. It's if you're going to be involved in policy advocacy, you have to have the numbers, you have to know what is working, you have to know what is not working, so that you become an effective partner you can't do it alone. You become an effective partner, an effective part of any collective action group that you form, an effective part of any do right foundation. If you're going to be part of it, you become an effective voice and director in that. So first of all, start with yourself, reject collective illusion, reject intellectual laziness, and plug in. If you forget anything I've said today, remember these three things. If you have a problem with Nigeria, don't be intellectually lazy about that problem. Research it. The power. If you have concerns about everybody doing the wrong thing, don't believe that. Not everybody is doing the wrong thing. And then plug in with like minds.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So sorry, I understand that we have a few questions online, but unfortunately, we have to do right with time. I actually also have my learning points, but I think because of time, I won't be able to articulate all of that. But I think I'll like to end up with what you said: reject intellectual laziness and plugging. I think that's a good place to end it. And say thank for those of us that have questions, please all these questions. We will have another session where we'll be able to take all of these questions. I want to thank you so much, Chinenye and Lola, for your contribution. I want to thank everybody that has been online. We hope next week we are going to be able to articulate all of our learnings and answer all of our questions. It's been a pleasure hosting this event. My name is Lola Boyeji, and I always believe that new Nigeria is possible and a new Nigeria will happen. Nigeria will win. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.